Today, we're playing with this. Today, we're going to be working on the Oldsmobile. I'm going to take it out of the garage and make it into a daily driver. We've got a few things we need to work on as we covered with the other videos. But what we're going to do is we're going to set the carburetor because it's got a little bit of a hiccup in it. We're going to put new motor mounts in it, and I'm going to go get the tires balanced. And that's what it's going to take to get this car back to daily driver status and something enjoyable to cruise with on the weekends. So let me show you what I got to help in all of this. I went out and got motor mounts for both sides and a transmission mount. And I also got a cheap vacuum gauge, so that should really help with the carburetor problem. These right here, I don't know if I need the transmission mount or not, but it was so cheap it would be stupid not to buy it. And these are just basically your universal Oldsmobile motor mounts. They use the same mount on both sides, so let's go ahead and we'll do the carburetor first and get that going, and then we'll do the motor mounts. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to pull the air cleaner off. This is just an old stock style air cleaner. And put it on the floor there. And we'll go over the carburetor and let me show you this. This is just your basic stock style Rochester Quadrajet. Now these have a pretty bad reputation, but that reputation is not deserved. Like everything, these carburetors do have a cult following, the same way a thermal quad does or a stock two-barrel Holley on a Ford. These carburetors, the reason they have such a bad reputation isn't because they're bad carburetors, it's because they are very finicky. But if you get them dialed in properly, these things are the next best thing to fuel injection. And they get awesome mileage, but you have to dial them in, and there's just a lot to them. They're overcomplicated, very finicky, but when they're set, they're just an absolute beast of a carburetor. Before we start, let me give you an overview of exactly what's going to happen here. We're going to go ahead and find a place to plug in. We're probably going to start right here. Down here at the bottom, there's two small mixture screws for each side. So we're going to be playing with those. And then we've already had to replace these right here. This one was cracked. We need to make sure this is clean and it's not leaking before we start. So that's always a good thing to do, to make sure there's no vacuum leaks before we start. Since we're using a vacuum gauge, the last thing you want is a vacuum leak, because you're going to get a real false readings and you're going to tune your car improperly. So let's get on with that. Okay, before you start, you should always consult a manual or a guide or something like that. I got my Chilton's manual here. There's a spot that talks all about using vacuum gauges. And if you have any questions, you should always consult, like I said, a manual. There's a bunch of videos on YouTube how to do this exact same for your specific application. That's important because RPMs, vacuums, pressures, and stuff like that may vary from engine to engines. For the most part, a carburetor is a carburetor, but just make sure you check your books and all that and you do it properly. Okay, so we got this plugged in. We're going to go down here and we're going to plug it into this port right. I guess we're not plugging it into that port. That could be part of my problem right there, actually. We'll have to fix that. The plug came out, so we'll hook it up to this. Plug it in right here. It's actually got a pretty good, decent fitting. We're going to start the car up, and then we'll start mixing with the idle screws, and I'll show you where it's supposed to be. Okay, so what you really want to do first, we need the idle up to about 850. We'll turn the idle screw up and get it going a little bit, and then we'll get it to go up a little higher. So let's turn this idle screw. Here we are. this up just a little higher. So we're going to start mixing with the idle mixture screws. We're going to start turning them out a ½ inch on each side to get this to work. But actually, with the way this is sitting right now, it's actually looking pretty good. So let's turn the screws out and see what happens. Okay, what we're seeing right now is the gauge is exactly where we want it. So that's all good. So the carburetor's fine. Okay, we took the car out for a spin. It's accelerating a whole lot nicer now. A lot of the stumble is out of it. It's still got a little bit of a stumble, but I attribute that to an accelerator pump or a clogged fuel filter. We'll address that later. But as for the car, it's running really good. Still has the shake. So now that we've got the carburetor mostly sorted out, we're going to take the car home and we're going to put the motor mounts in next. And hopefully that right there will solve the bulk of the problem.
So it's the next day. It's about 6:45 in the morning, and we're going to do the motor mounts. So we got to get the car jacked up while my slow coffee maker's working. So let's get the car up in the air and see what we're up against. So here we go. There's one. And there's the other, maybe. And yeah, they're not going to be too hard to get. Maybe. So let's see if I can get this out without too much pain and loathing. So I grabbed one of the new ones just to get a quick look. Pretty straightforward. It's just going to be an oily mess to get it in, so let me crawl under there and see how much this is going to suck and get really greasy, and I'll get back to you. It would appear that I lucked out. I thought the motor mount was bad because it was giving me just a little bit of flex, but it turns out I had a loose bolt. Let me show you what the culprit was. So we peek into this valley. See my hand here? There's a bolt right, now you really can't see it, but right there on the back side of the suspension rack there, or frame member, whatever you want to call it. There's a bolt there. That bolt had come loose, so I went ahead and tightened it up, and that actually should take care of it. I suppose I should have crawled under here and checked all this stuff out before I went out and bought a bunch of parts, but I will eventually end up replacing them. They're starting to go, but you know, that was the culprit this time, but it won't be the next time. So let's check the transmission mount. That's really easy to get to. I'll probably just go ahead and replace that anyways and show you the old one, and just go from there. There's the transmission mount right there. It's got a bolt there, one in the middle and one on the other side. There's 3 of them. I'll show you the new one, and then we'll get this swapped out real quick. So if you thought the motor mounts looked easy, this, very, very easy. We'll just screw right out, new one will screw right in. We have to jack up the back end of the transmission. Shouldn't take no time at all, and she'll go right in. So let's do that. Now we got the old one out. You see that spot right there. These go in and out real easy if you just pick up the transmission a little bit. Just put it in sideways like that and drop it through the slot. Boom, she's in, and now all you have to do is screw it in. We're going to go on a shakedown cruise here in a minute, now that I've got the new mount in, which is pretty straightforward, but let's talk about the old mount real quick. At first glance, there's really nothing wrong with this except some jackhole put 15mm bolts in it. But if you get to looking at it, while it's not technically torn, it is loose. And it's a whole lot squishier than you would think. So that right there told me that this thing was on its way out. But why was it on its way out? And the reason is, this just being basic rubber, and bent. With all the oil that's under the car, it just disintegrated it. Oil will disintegrate rubber over time. They're both petroleum byproducts, and the rubber just absorbs the oil and eventually gets spongy and starts to deteriorate. So it's important to keep the oil leaks on your car to a minimum if you can. On that Oldsmobile, I'm going to have to pull the engine out to fix all those leaks, and I'm just not even motivated enough at this point to do that. I just don't have the time. But the car runs really well. We're going to take it down on a shakedown cruise. I'm going to see if tightening that motor mount bolt, if that got rid of the vibration, and the transmission mount, with it being a little firmer now, hopefully that will absorb some more vibration too. So I'm going to get cleaned up, and we're going to go on a cruise.
Well, we ran it up to the auto parts store so I could get some Crown Vic parts, and she's just really running nice. For the most part, the only vibration I have left is coming from one of the rear tires, and as I talked about in one of my last videos, these tires have been probably one of the biggest disappointments I've ever wasted money on. But we got the carburetor tuned up. It's had just a little bit of a stumble when I hammered it at 70, but I think I need to put a new fuel filter on it, which I should probably do. But tightened up the bolts and the motor mounts, put the new transmission mount in. She's running great. Got the carburetor set. I wouldn't be afraid to drive this, 100, 200, 300 miles. I used to drive it 100 miles one way to work anyway, so I know it'll do it. But, so yeah, let's head back to the house and we'll do a synopsis there, and that'll be it. I mean, I'm pretty pleased, like I said. Well, we're back to the house and everything ran really well. Just fixing that bolt and new transmission mounts pretty much took care of almost all of the problem. I'm getting a little dieseling, which means I probably need to just adjust my timing just a hair. I mean, it doesn't do it all the time, but it does a little bit. So aside from that, I mean, other than getting the tires rebalanced, it's running great. And so it really doesn't take a whole lot to get some of these cars back on the road, back into daily driving status. Just a little bit of patience, a little time. I probably have. The mounts are really cheap. They're I didn't even give $20 for all three of them. The vacuum gauge was about $20, and I'll use that on a whole bunch of other things. And I use the manual, and you can even look up on YouTube how to use a vacuum gauge, or get, I got it to where it needed to be, and the car's just running tops. It's actually running really well. So I'm really happy about that. Ran up to Hayesville, got my auto parts, came back home, not a hitch. The thing just accelerated great, ran great, just did everything it was supposed to do. If you noticed, it does leak a lot of oil. It's got a pan leak, and that's kind of one of those things to where you're like, changing out a pan's a pain. So, and I'm not going to put any stop leak in it because that doesn't solve anything. So anyhow, I appreciate it. I hope this was at least a little bit informative. It wasn't too deep. I hope you liked the video, and thanks for watching. We'll catch you next video.